This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Raquel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by cinematographer Todd Dos Reis, whose work includes Bosch Legacy, Rebel, and the upcoming movie, The Blackening. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thank you, Gordon. Thanks for having me.
Now, I guess my first question, when I was doing research for The Blackening, on IMDb, it says it came out in 2022, but then in all the stuff that was sent to me, it says 2023. So I just want to make sure it's coming out June 16th this year, right?
That is correct. June 16th for Juneteenth. I think the June 2022 was for the Toronto Film Festival, which it premiered. So that's what happened with the 2022. So,
all right. So how did you get involved with this project?
I had been working with Tim Story on pilots for many years. And even before that, we knew each other from USC. We didn't go at the same time, but we knew each other from there. After many pilots, we were always talking about doing a film together. And he called me as soon as this one popped up, and he asked me to do it. And I jumped at the occasion.
So for a film like this, when you get the script, how do you start? Like, do you start to break it down right away, or do you read it a couple times first? Like, how do you take notes and get prepared for meeting with the director?
Well, luckily, I have a close relationship with Tim, so I got to hear what he had in mind before I read the script, and so I have his notes in my head as I'm reading the scripts. I like to do like what I call a 3-pass read, where I just read it just to read it and see what it's about. And then the second pass, I read it to start thinking about Tim's visuals and how I can enhance those visuals. And then the third is like what we can do practically on the set, what we have to do with our limitations or with our cast and crew, how to figure out how to do this film with the budget we had. It was a $5 to $6 million budget. So we had a lot of limitations. I literally do episodes of television that have $5 and $6 million budgets. So it was like, well, how am I going to do that in 20 days where I usually do a TV show or an episode of television in 8 to 9 days? Yeah. So that was the challenge. That was one of the main challenges.
I've been a camera person for 30 years, and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France, and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
For this film, like when you're going through the script, you talked about what you could do practical. So what were some of the things that you guys did practically on set?
Well, we were the main location was a house in Brentwood, which was supposed to be out in the woods. So we had to take what I did is I took what they had there. So instead of, and most of it's at night. Mm-hmm. So instead of bringing in all these movie lights to light or to light blackness, I use what we had there. So when I walked into a location, I see what lights they have. So I knew I was going to have to use a lot of their practical lights or not, or make some kind of adjustment to their practical lights. So we did that in almost every room in the house. I didn't want to have to get there was no way to get a large lighting package because we just didn't have the budget or the crew to handle that. So I did things like use their practical lights, maybe dim them down or not use all of them. Another scene, I used their lights, but I gelled them to be more moonlightish or like as if there was no light in the room. Where we had in one scene the lights go off. So what do? You have to, moonlight has to come through somehow. So we found ways. Luckily there was a skylight. We had a lot of windows, but mainly using their practicals and changing it with like a movie bulb, so that we have control of it, so we can dim it up or dim it down. That was one of the things we did for this film.
Was it, so you said it was done in Brentwood, and I noticed, because I don't have access to the film yet. I've seen the trailers and I watched a few clips that they've released. And in what I noticed in the clips they released, a couple of them are outside, and it sort of falls off at the end to sort of create that sort of illusion of the forest. Was that something done on set, or would you guys?
We were lucky that the house had like a lot of acreage around it. So we had the space. We didn't have to, there was only, I think, maybe a couple shots where we had to block the house on either side. But the house, the depth of the house, the acreage in the back was fine. And what I would do is, just to create depth, I would have maybe some light deep in the forest. So you still feel that there's depth out there. So I didn't want to just have black, have the monster there and just black behind that monster. So I created depth by having like a small pop of light here, a small pop of light there, just enough where you there's depth, but you don't know what's out there. So that's what
it felt like when you're looking at it. It's like you get the sense of everything out there, but it's not, a full forest.
So, it's basically trying to light background so you don't feel that it's like on a stage or just this black behind, like I said, the monster or cars. We wanted to create some kind of depth with the limitations we had.
Now, the film is playing very much on tropes of horror films, and I'm wondering, what did you go to horror films and like choose a few that you sort of used as inspiration? Did you create your own sort of look for it? Like, how did you approach this?
Well, I was never a big horror film fan. I mean, when I grew up, I saw a lot of the Friday the 13th. I mean, I was a big fan of The Exorcist. Jaws, I considered a horror film. But when Tim and I started talking, we talked about films that we liked. So we talked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Get Out was a big pull for us. And then Tim turned me on to this film that I hadn't seen, called Don't Breathe, which was basically locked in a house with the monster, So we use Don't Breathe a lot as a reference for this film. What else can we say about that? And a lot of the colors they use in Don't Breathe, I try to carry over into our film, The Blackening. But Tim has a much more vast knowledge of horror films, because he loves horror films. I was a minor fan, but I found something to grab onto when we talked about Don't Breathe, because I think that movie is really fantastic as far as lighting, as far as suspense. It had everything.
So what would you say was the most challenging scene for you to light in this?
I think anytime you have there were a lot of challenging scenes, but the ones that stick out, whenever you read a script and you're in the forest at night with no lights, stuff like that makes it challenging, but also fun, because you have to make up a light source. Where's that source coming from? So when we're in the forest, it was the moon. There were, we don't have any city around us, and I don't know if you saw the lake scene where one of our actors is swimming in a lake.
Yeah, it's in the trailer.
There is a lake, an actual lake in the middle of Los Angeles that I had no idea was there. So we got this location, and I just basically had to put moonlight in there. But we also had to black out Dodger Stadium, because Dodger Stadium the lake overlooks Dodger Stadium. You could see it. And unfortunately, the night we shot there I think it was the beginning of playoffs or something. So we literally had to have with our forest, we had to have a series of 20 by 20 blacks to black out Dodger Stadium. So that was one of the challenges. Another challenge was just going anytime you're in the house and the lights go out. Of where do the lights come from? Again, moonlight. Creating moonlight makes it fun and interesting. But I mean, the main challenge was the budget, just because you couldn't have a big crew, you couldn't have a series of lights that you would normally use.
I guess my next question, because you talked about like shooting without lights or making the sense of without lights. Do you, because one of the things that I always remember from film school was always like, was the fill tended to be a giveaway that you were using lights, because it'd be like, okay, that's the source, but all of a sudden you would have this fill from nowhere. So how do you do that, especially in the woods when it's just the moon or something?
I mean, it's a fine line to play with, just because you can't give, like you said, you can't give it away, but you do need to see faces. And I had the challenge of having a wide range of black faces, the tone of the lightest light to the darkest dark. So I had to somehow find that fine line of who do I put more light on, who do I put less light on. What I did with our characters, I basically knew if I had them all in a scene, I knew who to light for, because if I lit for the person who is in the mid-tone, everybody else would fall into place. So the lightest person would be a little brighter and the darkest person would be a little darker. And I knew I could control that in post-production. So whether I had to bring their faces down or darken them up a little bit. But just finding that fine line is tricky. And I like things dark, and Tim has a vast knowledge of what his films look like in theaters, in the best theaters and in the worst theaters. So he would, he would go, "Is that too dark?" And I was like, "No, I think it's just enough." And so we'd have that discussion on the set.
I'd like to ask you my last question. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
I'm a sports fanatic. So I don't know if it's a guilty pleasure. I just love watching the show. I think it's the funniest show on television, which is Inside the NBA with Charles Barkley and Kenny the Jet Smith and Shaq. But if you want like serious guilty stuff, I would have to go. My daughter is post-production supervisor of reality shows. So sometimes she'll get me hooked on like a reality show that I don't want to watch. But this one I think is my fault completely. It's any of the Below Deck series.
Oh, that's a great series.
I don't know if it's my Cape Verdean ancestry. Cape Verde Islands are islands off the west coast of Africa. They used to be a colony of Portugal. And where I grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a lot of my people were whalers and fishermen. So maybe I'm just drawn to the ocean, but I would have to say that one.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Gordon.
And that's it for this episode. Please make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Twitter at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.